The Littles, Chapter 6. Every night for a week, Mr. Little and Tom watched the Newcombs at dinner time. Mr. Little wanted to find out if the Newcombs had seen the mice, and what, if anything, they were going to do to get rid of them. Tom and his father hid high above the dinner table in the secret lookout place near the ceiling light. They could see everything that went on in the room. Below them, the Newcombs were finishing their dinner. "I saw a hummingbird outside the study window today," said Mrs. Newcomb. "It was feeding on the iris." "Marvelous," said Mr. Newcomb. "Would you mind passing the butter?" "That's a rare thing to see, you know. They're so tiny and timid." "And fast," said Mrs. Newcomb. "I moved closer to the window for a better look, and it was gone in a flash." Mr. Newcomb sipped his coffee. "Dear, don't you think this coffee's a bit weak again?" Mrs. Newcomb nodded. "What's the bird that sounds like a rusty iron gate?" Above them, the Littles listened. The Newcombs talked about many things, but as usual, neither one said anything about the mice. "Let's go," said Mr. Little to Tom. "They haven't seen the mice." Oh, there they are. Father and son climbed out of the lookout place. They walked across the ceiling between the rafters. Both were armed. Tom was carrying a bow and a quiver full of arrows. Mr. Little had a sword. He was carrying a lighted candle. "What can we do?" said Tom. "The Newcombs see birds everywhere outside in the house, but inside where the mice are, they never see anything. Are they blind or something?" Mr. Little sighed. "I don't know," he said. "Mice are quick animals. They're not easy to see, and they usually do most of their work when people are not around." "Hey, I have an idea," said Tom Little. "I know how to get them to see the mice." "How?" "It's easy. We can—" Just then, Tom's father stopped. Tom, following close behind, bumped into him. The candle fell from Mr. Little's hand and went out. Mr. Little reached for his sword. "Is it a mouse?" whispered Tom. "Shh." Quietly, Tom took an arrow and fitted it to the bowstring. There was a scratching noise in the wall ahead. Mr. Little and Tom stood still and tried to see into the blackness. They listened. When Mr. Little had heard enough to know that it was a mouse, he whispered to Tom, "I'll stand here. You hide behind that heating pipe. As soon as the mouse reaches the top of the wall, I'll light a match." He took a deep breath. "If he runs to attack me, shoot him with your bow and arrow, and don't shoot unless he attacks. The light may frighten him away." "What if I miss?" said Tom. "I have the sword," said Mr. Little. "The mouse will have to get awfully close for you to use the sword," said Tom. "That's why you better not miss with the arrow," said Mr. Little. Now go." Tom Little felt his way through the dark ceiling space to the pipe. He drew the arrow across the bow and pulled the string back with all his might. Then he aimed into the darkness toward the sound of the scratching. The noise grew louder and louder from the sound of it. Tom thought the mouse was climbing near the Little's tin can elevator. He hoped the mouse hadn't gnawed through the string. The boy had never seen a mouse. He had, of course, heard many scary stories about them. He was ready for something terrible. Suddenly, there was a burst of blinding white light, his father's match. Shadows danced. Tom Little blinked. Then he saw the mouse. It was climbing up over the edge of the wall. Its eyes were like black mirrors, shining black the light of the match. Tom forgot what his father had told him. He didn't wait for the mouse to attack. Instead, as soon as he saw the beast, he shot the arrow. It flew through the air and struck the mouse in the foreleg. The mouse squealed. "Nuts!" yelled Tom. I forgot." He shot another arrow. By that time, the mouse had climbed over the wall. As it struggled to its feet, the second arrow hit it in the rump. That's the bottom. It squealed louder. The arrows didn't stop the mouse. It crawled toward the light. A low, snarling growl came from the deep in its throat. Mr. Little stood his ground in the middle of the ceiling space, 4 feet away from the oncoming mouse. In one hand, he held the sword at arm's length, pointed at the mouse. In the other, he held a burning match high over his head like a torch. Then he lowered the match torch and pointed at the mouse. Suddenly, the mouse turned and limped away.